Also want to loop in Dr. Tien from Carbonis, and as Pete had mentioned earlier, and I think it's kind of a speaking of, I think Alex, you maybe were just in Dubai, and so you experienced some of the torrential downpour. Um, but climate impact is on the top of mind for a lot of people. And obviously, we're kind of, the space is new, something that I think the energy that we bring to Web3 and some of the decentralization is maybe trying to get away from some of these legacy systems or kind of the ways of working. And so I know that, climate change is certainly very important to a lot of us, but then also understanding that, like, as we go through and develop these new technologies, we don't want to be part of the problem. And so, wanted to hear from you, Dr. Tien, on, the importance of some of these green initiatives in cloud computing and how some of projects like ours and others can leverage the technology and, be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Thanks for inviting me. I think based on what we have been doing on carbon credits, we're not just looking at just normal energy sources from wind, from sun. We even come up with non-radiation, what do you call, water producing generators that can be activated at any time, any place. So I'm back in Dubai here to look. There's a possibility of bringing this technology, which is actually coming from Asia, and which they actually helps to reduce carbon, that means carbon emission. So my area, I'm actually helping to calculate the methodology and the process of generating more carbon neutral projects, especially now you mentioned the big word, 25% energy more consumption on this AI. The AI that we are doing now is just still is in its infancy. So wait till you start having another 100 times of this requirement. Just imagine the number of energy you'll be requiring. You'll be realizing that you're using more power on AI than any other source of power that you probably use at home. So if you're doing that, most of the homes has to be self-powered. So by doing self-powered, you can actually had to incentivize them. So carbon credit becomes how do you say, a reason to reduce and to fund the projects. So by us even looking at the most traditional way in the last 10 years is stove, where you use the reduction of methane and everything from stove cooking. But now if you are using solar power lightings or even a battery charging station, you actually also reducing the emission. But by that doing, you actually has earned carbon credits. So avoidance of carbon credit is also another subject that's now happening around the world. That means if you can recycle, and especially now waste is getting more and more expensive. With Hong Kong recently taxing every kilo bags that you have, those Hong Kong friends here will know that now they had to find out how much it's going to cost per kilo of bags they're going to throw out. This is always the beginning. Some countries have already practiced for the last 10, 20 years. So they realize that, well, once the habit becomes normal, the carbon reduction, everything comes into it. So for my interest is digitalization, real world assets, and it's also in a DeFi world, because in order to get this done, it cannot be done on the banking system, because the banking system itself doesn't even understand carbon credit, most of the banks, traditional banks. So if we don't activate things like this, especially this group, I like also because you are all in the source of power. That means the source of power that generate knowledge, data. So you're actually, how do you say, putting the genesis of data from here. So you're generating power to generate intelligence. So the intelligence you're generating here takes energy. So this energy is going to be very hungry. It's going to get hungry and hungrier because time is not on our factor. We actually, even just less than 2 years on ChatGPT, you already, the intelligence of human has been challenged. And probably another 5 years, we don't even need that challenge anymore because you'll be taken over. So these are things that we want to actually prepare ourselves so that we can go back and do all of things. There are still a lot of countries, people who still doesn't even have power. So this is why even if you disseminate power in decentralized, which always off-grid power transmission is always in the books everywhere around the world. In some countries, in Afghanistan, they still have power cut off because they don't have enough coals or because of the weather conditions. So every with the technology companies like in China manufacturing very cheaper cost of product of solar and everything, these are going to help us. So I see very importantly incentivizing of people to actually work on it. Even as you know, the intelligence of AI is through token. The token is different from the token we are talking about. The more tokens the AI is being built on, the more powerful the knowledge is. And this is also another big problem is AI sovereignty. So this is all happening in almost like less than 3 years we are talking here.
So, Dr. Tien, for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with carbon credits, can you just give a quick overview of kind of what those are and how they can be used to essentially mitigate some of the negative externalities of the compute power that our AI models and blockchains are consuming?
As this carbon credit is actually a UN initiative. It is not actually powered by American and Chinese or any countries. Some of these actually two areas of these carbon credits. They are the volunteer and the compulsory. So countries that have to pay the carbon tax. So those are compulsory, like in Sweden, Singapore is doing that. So that means every year you actually have to calculate your emission. So how do they start it from? They started from public listed companies 2 years ago. They're putting the law in place. So all companies, public companies, had to do ESG reporting, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So for those who don't understand carbon credit, scope 1 is actually the origination, the first group of people on the top, the holding companies or the companies who actually started the projects. Then in the scope 2, the shops, the restaurants, the cars they actually deploy. So these are the scope 3s, scope 2s. Scope 3 is actually where all the contractors, by using working with you all, they need to be carbon neutral. So why does this carbon neutral comes into it? So the government have to set up a system in such a way they have a control from top down, not from bottom up. So in order to top down, they do a compliance structure. So in most countries now it's voluntary. Part of US is voluntary, so you notice the biggest knowledge of carbon credit comes into space back 2021, where Elon Musk Tesla was able to sell the carbon credit to Chrysler for $1.5 billion. Then everybody noticed there's actually money in carbon credit. This is number one. The carbon credit number two is very simple. We do a very simple analogy that we have here in China, in Beijing. They used to say it's PM 2.5, which is actually pollutions of the skies. Now in Beijing, you don't see that anymore. So what they used to measure was putting a meter in a room, and if you're below 4 ppm, 400 ppm, that means it's normal. But if you're putting a small room, say have 20% sitting and smoking together, you will go as high as 1002 to 1005 ppm. That means it is polluted. So you're actually breathing somebody's emission. So carbon credit is the same thing. If we don't go and protect our environment, we don't have enough plants, we don't have recycle most of our products that we use. We tend to be careless in our packagings. So now packagings, the Amazon, they are reusable. Shoe boxes can be reusable. These are all circular. So all this comes under the different agenda that's been set up by UN. So UN is actually the setup back in 2015, 2010, 2015. That is where the first biodiversity carbon credit start coming out, and the standards start coming out. So before there was no much standard. Before were done by the accounting practice. Now because of ESG coming out, and in the US, public listed companies now have to do reporting by next year. So that means you have to report your carbon emission reporting, whether you like it or not. At the end of the day, after the reporting, then you get signed up by when you submit your disclosure statement, how much carbon credit you emit. This data is being transferred back to the fiduciary country or the country that you own, and then this data is being submitted to UN. So why this exercise came in, like for instance, like Singapore have declared by 2030 we will have half our carbon credits, and by 2050 we have 100% carbon neutral. If I don't become carbon neutral, I'll buy carbon credits from the same standard that we can use. So at the end of the day, carbon credit will becomes a very valuable, we call assets, digital assets. So even that itself, just for Canada alone, is gazetted. By 2030, the carbon credit will be worth 175 Canadian dollars. So that means your fuel consumption you rather buy electric car than you to use a fuel consumption car. A normal car itself will average a year paying about 680 tons of carbon credits in its lifetime. So you don't want to do that. So you actually wants to be aware of the living you're going to have now. We have COVID in the last 5 years or 4 years. Just imagine by 2050, if we don't protect what we have on Earth, then you actually be wearing oxygen masks. This is why we're getting more worried because the alarm bells are coming. The weathers in deserts, 25 years never rained so heavily in Dubai, they rain it. Even in Hong Kong, unbelievable, even just a small rain over flooded. Things never happen. Guangzhou just happened yesterday, same thing, flood. It's just unmeasurable. This weather is getting crazy because of climate change. So are we going to protect it? Are we going to understand this carbon credit? You have to do it because you are forced to do it because of tax. There's only you call force. You can live in that country, then you don't have to pay the tax. But once you do that, then you realize you're offsetting. By you paying the tax, you'll be aware of what is happening. That's why carbon credit it will becomes a must very soon in most countries. Whether you like it or not, you export products there, you have to meet the standards. These standards are being practiced globally in 197 countries as I was speaking today.
Wow. So maybe in summary too, carbon credits essentially offer a way for businesses, third-party actors, different people to essentially that are not able to become carbon neutral to offset the impact of their carbon footprint through a financialized mechanism, i.e., the carbon swaps. And so it sounds like those are becoming, or the anticipation is those will become increasingly valuable as we go forward, given some of the what's now voluntary but are becoming more compulsory required offsets for those businesses.
Yes, and I put maybe in a very short sense, carbon credit is a luxury. I'll put it this way: you pay to pollute. So if you want to pollute, you pay for it. So now, if oil companies want to sell the oil, they have to pay for the oil. Not only on top of that, they have to pay the carbon credits. So somebody has to pay the rubbish that is created on the air. The carbon credit is what we look at is somebody paid for. And the beneficiary at the end, which surprisingly are those countries who has all the natural reserve and never able to have a solar street lights, electric bikes. So now you're able to actually donate to them or even invest in them to help them to this. I see another movement in this carbon credit is the technology now is now decentralized, no more in the main countries like the powerful China or the India or the what do you call the American countries. You look in the poorer countries now having electric bikes, solar panels in their home in Laos. So it is a new movement. By being carbon neutral, you actually getting everybody the fair share of technology that is paid for polluters by polluters.
Got it.